Welcome to the Faithful Five podcast. I am super excited to have a little youth on the podcast today. Joseph Wilbur is joining us today. Welcome, Joseph. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me on this. Looking forward to discussing with you. So I'm a senior at the University of Pennsylvania, double majoring in classics and religion and minoring in medieval and Renaissance studies. I'm also a varsity athlete at Penn on the rowing team, and I think that basically covers the main parts of my life right now.
Wow, that's a lot on your plate. And
Absolutely, yeah.
you're graduating right now, right?
Yeah, it's basically my last week of exams and all that right now. So moving on.
That's awesome. Congratulations. Moving into the real world, as they say. So, Joseph, tell me a little bit about your faith journey, more about, when did faith start to play a major role in your life? And did something trigger it, or it's just been kind of a part of your of the family and your background?
Yeah, sure. So I think looking back, I would say I definitely grew up in a very Christian household, probably a bit more Christian than even many other people who might identify as Christian. What I mean by that is I was going to vacation Bible school. I was going to all sorts of church events. I was hearing Christian music in the car. Christianity was definitely a big part of my childhood for as long as I can remember. But then there's the interior dimension, right? Because you had all those stuff going way back, but then at some point I had to make some decision myself and actually start to embrace all of that culture that I was imbued in. And I'd probably say that happened around 10 years old or so, which is a young age, right?
Yeah.
I remember reading the lives of many saints. Of course, not these huge tomes, definitely some children's versions of them, right? And those started to hold up for me models of sanctity that I tried to imitate myself. But I do have to say it was not quite a consistent path from age 10. Otherwise, I might be a living saint in front of you, right? If that had stuck in that trajectory. Had lots of off and on times through middle school and high school. And as we said, now I'm in college. And I would say things are still moving in the right direction, but never, I think that's a big part of this whole faith journey is that you have to keep moving in the right direction.
So, talk a little bit about you're at the University of Penn. Talk a little bit about living the faith day to day or trying to live the faith. I mean, we're all human. None of us are saints yet. That's our goal. But just talk about, at the University of Penn, the ups and downs of trying to live your faith a little.
Yeah, I don't want to deny the challenges there. I've seen probably some rankings that put Penn as one of the top party schools, and I can tell you if you wander outside your dorm room at a certain point at night, you're going to recognize why we earned that ranking. There's a lot of stuff going on the school that probably Christians shouldn't be involved in. So I don't want to deny that there's challenges there, and that's even present in the classroom in regular hours too. A lot of my professors, most of them I would say are not Christians, and a lot of them are probably antagonistic towards the faith as well. But there is something about that whole environment, all those pressures, both from your peers, from your professors, that actually also forces you to take your faith seriously. And we're definitely blessed to have a great Newman Center community, good Catholic ministry there with missionaries, old priests who are definitely living their faith. And I think that's both something in my own life and the lives of many others that I've recognized that there's a lot of people who actually show up to daily mass every day. It's not the whole school, but the people who are actually fighting against that culture are fighting against it quite strongly.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not just the University of Pennsylvania; it's every college campus in America probably. So let's transition to maybe someone, persons that was most influential in your life, from a faith perspective, or maybe triggered that, the direction that you've taken with your commitment to your faith.
Yeah, sure. I think it would be remiss if I didn't say God is a person, right? Aquinas says it too much in the Prima Pars of his Summa. So God is always involved in all of this. But I also, as I pointed out earlier, I was reading a lot of the lives of the saints, and they're not living people right now with us. But in some way, if we actually belong to the Catholic Church is made up of both those dead and those who are living. And I would say that some of the most influential figures in my life have been the saints. I referenced Aquinas just now. I have a bunch of his books there on the shelf. And I think one of the big struggles, especially today, is there are a lot of ways that we could say, oh, I just don't have any good Catholic friends. I don't have anybody who can actually be a good role model. And I don't want to deny the need for us to actually go out of ourselves. I have lots of great Catholic friends who I'm always having good conversations with. But they're not always there, right? There's going to be times when during the summertime, everyone goes home. So what am I going to be doing then? And I think that's also one of the places where I end up turning to the saints, especially Aquinas and many others. I would probably say Aquinas is one of the most influential ones.
So talk a little bit, change gears a little from your perspective. And I think it's good to have a youthful perspective as well with your faith journey. What do you think some of the biggest obstacles are for men to either live their faith or, be more consistent with where their faith can take them? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think the thing with faith, we've been talking about it this whole time as kind of a way of describing our Christian life, right? But also the word faith has an alternative meaning, a very specific theological meaning, and it is one of the theological virtues. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that itself. If we look at the Vatican Council, how does the Vatican Council actually talk about faith? It says that it's a supernatural virtue where we believe those things revealed by God to be true. And I want to center on that word belief, because you're talking about, okay, what is the biggest obstacle for us as men to be living to faith? Well, one of the things in order to live to faith is also to have that theological virtue of faith. And it has that dimension of belief. And especially in today's world, I think that our minds, which is where beliefs have to be centered, can be pulled to so many different objects. I can see that myself, and many of the ways that I was saying I was presenting at these academic conferences. These people are filling their mind with things, right? They might even be studying the right things, but what is the lens that they are actually looking at those things through? And if we're going to talk about the biggest obstacle, I think it has to be perhaps a lack of the virtue of faith, a lack of actual true belief in God. Because, right, our will, as one of the other major powers of us humans, our heart that also has these desires, it's kind of blind faculty, meaning our heart just kind of sees things or gets drawn towards things. But in order to get drawn to those things, it has to come from where our intellect is telling our will about those objects. So to give you an example, maybe to flesh this out a bit more, I might say, oh, I want something to drink and I have this desire to drink something. But then as I actually reflect intellectually about maybe what is actual drinks that would be good for me in this moment, then you see the interconnection between those two powers. So I think one of the things that a lot of people need to start living out is actually informing their mind with the right things belonging to the virtue of faith in order to then live out, as we're talking about the Christian life, as this alternative meaning of the virtue of the word faith.
Okay. So maybe bring it down a little in terms of, believing in God, but having a relationship with God and being able to bring your struggles to God, being able to open up about, whatever the struggles are, but having a relationship and being open to the belief that He's able to provide us with help and guidance kind of on a daily basis. Am I going too granular there?
No, I think we can pull some things out there. I think I've been talking about the virtue of faith, and one of the mentions of the virtue of faith would be what we might label as an interior life. This is something many of the saints talk about. And if we're talking about another obstacle for people living out their Christian faith today, it might be the fact that we don't actually have a strong interior life. But what does it actually mean to have an interior life? I've recently been reading a lot of Father Gary Lagrange. He has this great work, The Three Ages of the Interior Life. So hopefully by the very title, you can grasp that he talks about this. And one of the things he talks about is that we can imagine this as somebody sitting on a couch, okay? And they're going to be watching a TV screen, and on that TV screen, their life is playing by. But then, what is it that's actually taking place today? Most people just have their life passing by, and they don't actually ever sit on the couch to watch that life that is passing by. But then there's a third element here, which is, as you're kind of talking about, we need to also be inviting Christ into this. So now imagine you're not just taking the time to watch the life passing by on a TV screen, but now you actually invite Christ to sit on the couch with you to observe the life that is actually passing by. And if we're going to talk about more struggles, challenges that people are facing, it might be that dimension that not only do they not have the virtue of faith, but they're not actually living out that virtue of faith by inviting Christ into a time of silence, a time of recollection, a time of developing an interior life in order to see what is God actually doing in your life on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, okay. That brings it down. I like that. So secondary to that, one is practicing the faith. Why do you think I mean, practicing is challenging enough, but men who do practice their faith, or, we all try to practice our faith at one level or another. Why is it harder for men to talk about and be open more about their faith? Maybe more so, in my experiences, women are much more open about their faith journeys than men are. What do you think the dynamics are in us being able to be open about the ups and downs of our faith journey?
Yeah. I think one of the things a lot of guys realize is that we are very drawn by sensual objects, right? It's a well-known challenge that lots of guys are going to probably be the ones to struggle with lust, right? We are more drawn into that dimension of experience. And what that actually means then is I've been talking about this practice of the interior life, that you need to have habits of recollection, have habits of silence. I think that might in itself be a little bit more difficult for us as men because we're so drawn to all these other objects in ways that, not to say that women don't have those same struggles, but we are particularly drawn to just not even just other women, but even food, drink, video games. That's something that there's that stereotype of the guy just playing video games, right? That's something that we kind of are drawn into. And I think the other thing to talk about there would be it's not just that we're drawn to these other objects, but even when we want to go and sit down and have that period of recollection, that time of silence, developing an interior life, we also are going to have to experience vulnerability, emotion. Now we're actually going to be called to do something. And that's something especially hard for us guys to have these heart to heart, deep felt communications, not just with other guys, but even then with ourselves and inviting Christ into that too.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. Talk a little bit about, what advice would you give to, well, first, let me take a step back. Biggest myth about faith. What would you say with that?
Biggest myth.
I'm not good enough to, I don't go to church, and I'm on the surface level here. I don't go to church on Sunday because I'm, not worthy to go to church, or the people that go to church are hypocrites because they're, not living the full Christian life on the outside world. Just is there, or, someone just said the other day, the biggest myth is that living your faith is not fun. Well, it could be actually the polar opposite of that.
Yeah, I think one of the things might be I talked a lot about the virtue of faith kind of transforming the way we're talking about faith as Christian life, but also as an aspect of belief. And I don't want to deny that belief is about books and knowledge and learning all of that. But if we properly talk about the theological virtues are virtues that are pulling us to a person. They're not just pulling us to books and reading and more knowledge, but they're pulling us to God himself. And I think if we were to talk about one of the biggest myths about faith, it might be the fact that, oh, I don't have a strong dimension of faith because I don't have this knowledge. I don't have all this learning. Oh, if you actually know God as a person, that is the dimension that then reveals you have a strong aspect of the virtue of faith. And we see this in itself in many of the lives of the saints. Who are some of the greatest saints? We could look at St. Catherine of Siena, right? She couldn't read. It was only Christ himself who was able to kind of supernaturally teach her to read. And then you had all these different doctors and theologians of the church coming to her, interviewing her, and being astounded by her deep knowledge. But that knowledge didn't come from any books. It didn't come from any learning. It actually just came from her experience of prayer with a person, namely God himself.
So real quickly, we wrap it up here. graduating from Penn, you were a Division I athlete. What are your hopes for in the next couple of years? Where do you think you're headed? I know you just graduated, not to put any pressure on you, but what do you what does the future look like?
Yeah, immediate future, I'm going to be doing a couple more academic conferences this spring. One of them is going to be the International Medieval Studies Congress, and the next one is going to be the American College English Association. So more presenting some of my researchy stuff. But I'm also going to be working with Penn. We have something called the Collegium Institute, which is kind of our more intellectual version of a Newman Center Catholic campus ministry. And that's going to be what I'm going to be doing, at least for this spring.
All right, that's awesome. Joseph, thank you for taking the time to join the podcast. It's great to have your unbelievable insight and experiences in the faith, and we really appreciate you taking the time.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
All right, take care. Thanks.